I believe that freedom means different things to different people. And that you can't just take freedom and slap it on and say, this is what it means and it needs to apply to all 193 countries around the world. It's the same universal thing. Freedom comes from what you were oppressed as. I don't want to go into a country and thinking like, look, I'm from the United States, we're the best in the world, we have this American exceptionalism. No, I'm going to go to China with an open mind and experience it. And you're going to find a China that is very different than what Western media tells you.
Hello everyone, from the beautiful Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. This is Javier Correa, the Tax Terminator, and today I'm joined by a man that I like to call a personal friend now, Cyrus Janssen, geopolitical expert. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure, absolutely.
Pleasure to have you here. So everyone, we are now in Asia, but I have had the opportunity to meet with many wonderful Americans, and in particular Cyrus, that took many planes to get here. And we've been discussing some very interesting topics that involve the United States, that involve Asia, and in particular, the Asian giant, the People's Republic of China.
Correct.
Now, my guest here, Cyrus, happens to be an expert in both countries. You are an American, but
Correct.
You've lived in China for a while.
Yes.
You travel back and forth, you do business. Tell the audience a bit how you came to become that guy, your experience in China, and why you do what you do.
Absolutely. So my journey in China started in 2007. I had just graduated university. I was looking for opportunities, and actually my very first job was actually a golf professional. So
really?
I was actually played golf at the university for the team, had an opportunity to actually become a golf coach in a brand new golf academy that was opening up in Shanghai, China, believe it or not.
Nice, okay.
Now, to give you some context, 2007, China's GDP grew 14.4% that year. So
Huge.
this was a massive opportunity for China. China was really opening up. 2008 was the Beijing Olympics. 2010 was the Shanghai World Expo. So you had a lot of momentum going in China, and it was a very amazing time. Of course, I was a young man, just 23 years old, graduated university, moved to China, wanted to experience it. And I think the key thing and this is really for anybody that's interested in going abroad, is really having an open mind. Really trying to drop whatever expectations you have of the country or any preconceived notions. Go as a blank page and really try to go and experience that country for what it is. Because wherever you go in the world, you need to, understand what the culture is there and how it is. I can't bring my American perceptions into China and succeed. So I was
American imperialist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into a country and thinking like, look, I'm from the United States, we're the best in the world, we have this American exceptionalism. No, I'm going to go to China with an open mind and experience it, and you're going to find a China that is very different than what Western media tells you.
It's good that you actually brought that point up, because you actually reference this quite a bit. You say that Westerners have this idea of China, especially in the United States, that is basically, I want to say, fed to the population by the typical mainstream media, your CNNs, your Fox News, or your local American podcasters that have been over there. But you travel there and you say, hey, there are things happening in China, there's tech being developed in China, and the West, in particular the United States, is turning more or less a blind eye, like they're ignoring it. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, and I think that's what we need to understand is that for most Americans, and I'm talking more specifically people from the United States, is that they have a perception of China that it is a dystopian country, that there is a dictatorship in place, that there's no freedom, there's no happiness. Actually, honestly speaking, I would say their perception of China would that be of like North Korea. People tell me, Chinese people are cut off from the world. Yeah. Chinese people have no access to information.
They talk about the Communist Party and things like that.
I mean, people say Chinese people can't travel. I said, Chinese people are the #1 tourists in the world. I mean, you go anywhere in the world, you're going to find Chinese people. Filled with Chinese people. So, but we have this perception in America where, of course, as we know in the United States, our country is all about freedom. I mean, that's a big thing.
That's the label. That's a brand.
It's the label. It's a brand, right? That's something that's very important to people from the United States, is that we have this freedom. But actually, when you go to China and you start living there, you start seeing how people actually live their lives in China, you're going to see a very different perception, again, a very different reality than what is being taught to you in Western media. And I always say this, I say there's a lot of happiness in China. There's a lot of good things happening in China. There's a lot of normalcy. I mean, no different than if you and I, hey, there's a sporting event tonight, you want to go to a restaurant, grab something to eat, watch a game. In China. They're doing the same thing.
Right.
And so I always want people to connect on a more human level.
Got it. Something that you mentioned during our panel, because we did have a panel on chaotic times here at the Nomad Capitalist Live. Cyrus and I were part of it. You said something interesting. You said, in the United States, the notion of freedom comes from the American Revolution, right? British Empire, we want to kick them out, 13 colonies, the Tea Party, overtaxation, all of that.
Right.
But in China, the notion of freedom has been not liberation from government, but like running to government or something along those lines. Do feel free to correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but I believe that's what you mentioned. And so it's interesting because you talked about how the Chinese people are actually happy with the stability the Chinese government brings to them. Can you shed a bit of light into that?
I think this is a really important question that you brought up, and I want to really nail this point home for our viewers that are watching this, because I believe that freedom means different things to different people, and that you can't just take freedom and slap it on and say this is what it means and it needs to apply to all 193 countries around the world. It's the same universal thing. Freedom comes from what you were oppressed as. So let me break that down. In the United States, when our country was founded, we were oppressed from the British. The British government was taxing us, hence the Boston Tea Party. We wanted to be liberated from the government and establish our own government. So there was that's where our freedom came from, was a lack of government. Now, if we go to China actually unfortunately had the complete opposite. There was not an established government in China, and as a result, there was a tremendous amount of chaos. You had warlords, you had a tremendous amount of instability. We look at even through Chinese history, right? If you talk to Chinese people, they'll tell you 5,000 years of history.
Yeah, very big. The different dynasties and all that.
But the dynasties, how did they rise and fall? Is, they would rise, a lot of power and wealth was created, then the next dynasty would come in and destroy everything. So it's this constant cycle of rise, fall, fall. And then, even in 1912, that system was done. Then it was until 1949, until the Communist Party was established, that actually that was the first moment in China's history that, okay, we actually now have a government, we now have a country, we now have some stability. And moving forward, it is what Chinese people crave to this day, is that you have a safe country, you have a stable country, and that you know what the future is going to be like. And so that's where the difference is. And I always say this, is that if you look at China through the lens of an American, you're not allowed to vote for your president, you're not allowed to carry firearms. Well, that is not freedom to Chinese people, because
they wouldn't care about those things.
Well, that leads to chaos.
Okay.
And in America, we would say, well, I would rather have chaotic times, right? I'd rather live in a more dangerous society.
Exactly.
Because I'd rather have a gun.
Exactly. Right? It's my individual liberty to have a gun and defend my home.
Yeah. There's a direct correlation, right? You can't, without a doubt, the United States is a much more dangerous country than China, simply because of the presence of firearms, and there's a plethora of them.
Okay.
So that's a fact, right? It's not an opinion about that. It's just, we can look at the statistics of homicides, and we know political assassinations. We know there's a lot.
We saw Charlie Kirk a few days ago. Yes. Very unfortunate.
This very unfortunate thing, but this is life in America. School shootings, we're the only country in the world that has to deal with that problem. There's not another country in the world that has that pandemic of school shootings. Unfortunately, it happens every day. The day that Charlie was assassinated, school shooting in Colorado.
Same day. Wow.
Within an hour.
I was not aware of this. Wow.
And the thing that you're not aware of that is because it's so common in America that we had to change the definition of a mass shooting. It has to be over 4 people.
Oh my God.
So if 3 people get killed, it's
not a mass shooting. So statistically speaking, we can put it under the rug, basically.
And we're so numb to that idea of shooting. It's just what life is in America.
Interesting.
But again, a lot of people would say, I'm okay with that, because I want to have access to guns and I want to have less government. Whereas in China, and people in China, interesting enough, when you say I'm an American, that's the first thing people ask you in China. What about the gun culture?
The guns.
What about the guns?
The cowboys.
And I try to tell them, I say, well, that means freedom in America. And they're like, well, that doesn't mean freedom to us. That doesn't make sense. So again, and this is really why, we're talking about being, a nomad capitalist or traveling around the world, why it's so important to travel, to gain that perspective and learn about other cultures so that you can be better informed as a global citizen.
Yeah, and look at everything through a different lens.
Correct.
I do want to bring you back to China for a sec, because you spent some time, is my understanding, in the very interesting jurisdiction of Hong Kong.
Correct.
And the reason why I want to bring up Hong Kong is because obviously that's where East meets West, basically. Right? British colony for a very long time, and is now under this one country, two systems. It has been since 97, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And so Hong Kong is weird because you have some kind of English common law influence. You do have a very capitalistic, like genuine Western style capitalist system, but at the same time, they're part of China.
Right.
What are your thoughts on Hong Kong? Is Hong Kong the bridge between the West, mainly the United States, and China? Does Hong Kong have a larger role to play as a quasi-independent city-state?
Well, Hong Kong has always been that connection, right? It's always been the bridge to China, historically, to mainland China, I should say. So Hong Kong is always, it's a very interesting one. It's very hard for many people to understand that because Hong Kong is part of China, but yet it is very independent in many ways, right? It has its own language, it has a different passport, it has a different currency, different banking system. They drive on the opposite side of the road.
Like the British.
Yeah, like the British. So there's a lot of differences in Hong Kong. So it's a very unique part of China. It's a very unique part of the history. And yes, so for many years, for decades, it was always your gateway into China. When China first started opening up, the way that foreign companies would go in is they would first establish a regional office in Hong Kong, and they would use that office as a bridge to get access into mainland China. I would say today it is still important. It still certainly serves that role, certainly in the financial sector. Banking, finances is a huge market in Hong Kong. But now we're seeing mainland China starting to really open up as well. So it's a lot easier for foreign businesses to go directly to Beijing or Shanghai.
So it's no longer as essential to use Hong Kong as a bridge. There's historical precedent, so a lot of people feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. Historical preference. And there's still different tax laws. For example, it's a great tax jurisdiction. The maximum tax rate in Hong Kong is 15%. So, you think about sheltering tax or even, if you're a very affluent person, 15% tax is not that much.
And it's a territorial system on top of that. So foreign sources income is usually not taxed. There are a couple of exceptions there, but okay. And so to a second point about Hong Kong, we relatively recently, saw some major protests in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Would you say Hong Kong right now is as independent, as autonomous as it was a few decades ago?
I would say the answer to that is no. It's definitely not the same, but I also think that I don't think it's as exaggerated as before. What happened is that there was a very controversial national security law that was passed. And what's interesting is actually, if you go back and research what was the catalyst to this being passed, what happened was there was a Hong Kong man with his pregnant girlfriend, went to Taiwan. He murdered the girlfriend.
Oh my God.
So that's obviously 2 lives and she's pregnant. And he went back to Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong does not actually have a national security law. So they could not extradite him to Taiwan. They didn't have the extradition law. And he couldn't stand trial for that crime in Hong Kong because he didn't commit it in Hong Kong. So essentially, he was free.
He got off, right?
Yeah. So this was the issue, right? So the issue is, it's like, well, we can't have a guy commit a murder like that and not extradite him. We need to have this process. So they said, we're going to pass this national security law. Now, of course, I'll be very honest. A lot of people, they were very scared of that because they thought, well, what if I say something against the Communist Party in China? What if the Communist Party deems that I'm inappropriate and then they extradite me as a Hong Kong citizen back to mainland China to stand trial? There was a lot of fear. There's no proof that that's not what China was doing, but again, it was more like there's a fear of that. And so I think a lot of people, I would say a lot of Hong Kong people would not be, a lot of people are not happy that law was passed. A lot of people feel that it's just not the same as it was before. That being said, I think Hong Kong people, they definitely look at themselves as Chinese. They definitely look at Hong Kong, was and always will be part of China. But it's a unique place there. I'm still very bullish on Hong Kong. We maintain residence in Hong Kong. We have banking in Hong Kong. I still think it's a very amazing place to do a lot of business.
What about the business culture in Hong Kong versus the business culture in the States? Quality of banking. What can you say about that?
Quality of banking. I think it's I think it's one of the best banking places in the world, to be honest. I think the quality of banking is fantastic. Again, the tax thing is a very important element of that, I would say. But yeah, as far as opening a bank account, establishing, opening a company, all of this is streamlined. You've had foreigners be, in Hong Kong for, well over 100 years, doing business and things like that. So it's a very established, one of the best banking cities and systems in the world.
So as an American, you feel satisfied with the banking and financial service you've received in Hong Kong?
Absolutely.
100%.
100%.
Okay. Now, you've brought up, we talked about business culture, all of these things. Now, interesting, where do you see the United States and China moving forward? Because obviously, we cannot deny the United States is still the global superpower.
Sure.
GDP, military power, obviously unrivaled, at least for now, I believe. You'll talk about that in a sec. But China, for a long time, was rapidly catching up. GDP, as you mentioned, at one point, 12% growth.
Right.
Chinese military spending has increased. Chinese technological power. You gave a fantastic talk last year about how China is rapidly catching up in many fields. So the U.S. leads still, but not by much.
Right.
So maybe in a few years, we'll even be on par with, or China will be on par with the U.S. So how do you see this moving forward? US versus China, multipolar world, power dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing that we want to really highlight here, Javier, is right now we live in a multipolar world. What that simply means is that you have multiple superpowers in play. And what it really means is I want to kind of go a little bit more macro away from just US, China and look at our world, because we have 193 countries around the world. And so what we're seeing is, for example, China is the largest trading partner to 120 countries around the globe.
The vast majority.
The vast majority, right? I mean, you look at a continent like Africa, throughout Southeast Asia, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of influence, and China is trading, and they're a very critical part of their supply chain. We do look at the military spending in China has increased. I would say that actually the Chinese military can rival the United States, and in a lot of factors can actually overtake. So for example, I mean, when we look at...
Wow, but that was a powerful statement. So you believe the United States is no longer unquestionably the dominant military power in the world?
I don't think it's unquestionable, but I think that I would say if I had to pick one, I would say the United States still is number one. Okay. But I would say that gap is very, very tight, and it's certainly at a point now where you would not want to go to a head-to-head conflict, because there's no clear winner in that conflict. You wouldn't say, okay, the United States is the number one military power, we would destroy China in a fight. I don't think that's the case at all.
So it's number one, not by much.
Number one, not by much, but also you got to look at you got to also look at this, Javier, is what are the areas of critical technology, right? If we are going to go to a hot war, which, by the way, I'm 100% against any war. I never would want to see that.
We support peace.
Absolutely. But I mean, it's a different, right? The big thing is drone technology right now. Who's leading drone technology?
The Chinese?
Chinese. So, I mean, you look at actually on September 3rd of this year, they had the huge military parade in Beijing. This was actually the celebration of the 80th anniversary of China's defeat over Japan in the Imperial War. Now, what was really significant about this is that China had this 80-year anniversary. They had a massive military parade, and for the first time, they debuted a tremendous amount of new technology that had never been seen before, even by Chinese or by anybody. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of unmanned drones. They had a tremendous military, parade where they really wanted to showcase. And I think the key message here was not a message of we are going to go out and, start a war. It's just more like, look at where we've come. Mm-hmm. You do not want to start a war with us.
Yeah, we have these capabilities. Like a deterrent.
Okay. Absolutely, it's a deterrent. And so I think, when you look at, there's a fascinating statistic where, for the United States to build ships, to build a ship, it would take, to build one ship would take, a long time, something like 8 to 9 months to build a ship because of the ship building capabilities. Mm-hmm. In the United States, China can produce 7 to 8 ships in a month.
7, 8 in a month.
Yeah.
And in terms of quality, would the American ship be far superior in terms of quality?
I don't think it would be far superior. I mean, you're still going to get a very high-tech ship. I mean, you would hope that if you can only produce one, it's going to be of a better, quality.
Yeah, I would assume so.
But we look at the shipbuilding capabilities. The Chinese have that. We look at the menu. I mean, again, 35% of the gross products produced in the world are produced in China. So that's a tremendous number. And so when you look at where's China's strength? China's strength is in manufacturing.
Of course.
So again, that's an advantage, to the Chinese. So again, I think we've shifted into a different part of our world now where, again, China is a massive superpower. Even if we want to talk about GDP, I mean, if actually we measure GDP in terms of purchasing power parity, mm-hmm. China's economy would actually be bigger than the United States if we view on that metric alone.
On that metric alone, okay.
So I mean, it is a very big economy as well. A lot of people saying, hey, China's economy is in the dumps. It's not growing anymore. Well, it's still growing around 5% this year in 2025. That's equivalent of adding a Thailand-sized economy to an already existing very big economy. I mean, that's still a pretty decent amount of growth
in the U.S.
It's still more growth in the U.S.
And so let me ask you this. So you mentioned obviously China, massive manufacturing superpower. That's very interesting. But I bet many of our viewers will say, okay, Cyrus, that's great. But the U.S., we did manufacturing in the 20th century. We were the best. But now the U.S., we're leading in knowledge-based industries. We've got Silicon Valley. We've got the best minds in the world. Does that still give the U.S. an edge? Is the U.S. still the leading power in knowledge-based industries? And is China catching up in that regard too?
I don't think the United States is the leader in those knowledge-based industries, because what we're seeing is a lot of dynamics. For example, you look at the world's top universities, okay, and we look at fields like quantum computing and technology, computers, anything, mathematics, engineering, your STEM. China is closing the gap on a lot of those. So now, for the first time, you have a lot of Chinese universities ranking in global rankings as far as a very high ranking. Now, of course, like Harvard and MIT, would definitely be in the top 10, but Chinese have, multiple schools in the top 10 worldwide.
Which weren't there a decade ago.
When you look at the amount of AI research that's being produced, China's outproducing the United States as far as patents, as far as the amount of critical research. Absolutely. And there was actually an amazing study done by a think tank down in Australia. It's ASPI, the Australia Strategic Policy Institute. They produced a annual report called the Critical Technologies Report. And so it had, these are the 44 critical technologies for the future of our world. China is leading in 37 of the 44 categories.
Wow.
So that's a stat. And this
China is leading in 37 out of 44.
37 to 44 in the world, in the most critical areas of technology, like quantum computing would be one of them. There's many of these critical technologies. Battery technology would be one. But the thing what's amazing is, and what I like to do in a lot of my research is, I always try to source things from a Western source. So this is an Australian think tank that's actually been funded by the U.S. government. Okay. And they're the ones producing this report. So, I want to just make that very clear when we're talking about the sources of this information. These are Western sources. These are, so again, if you have
it's not biased.
It's not a biased one. And I think that's where, when you get into areas like engineering and mathematics, and you're talking to professors around the world, they're very apolitical. Professors want to work on fixing problems, right? Engineers want to work on fixing problems. So they don't care if it's China or the United States or Germany or Japan.
It's just the love of science.
It's the love of science, right? So they come together, and scientists are able to always work together.
Now, there's one interesting thing that you mentioned there. So this really is traumatizing. That number, I did not expect that. 37 out of 44. However, this does ring a bell with Trump policy, because if we follow the news, we see Trump is making this huge thing about chips being made in the United States, and he wants the United States to be the crypto capital of the world. And, and he's meeting with the tech CEOs, and you see Tim Cook in the White House and Sam Altman and all these people. Right. Do you believe that Trump's policies, or let's say policies that are in that direction, could help the United States regain its edge? Because I do think the U.S. definitely has the infrastructure. Like if the U.S. got its act together, I think there's the manpower, the financial capital, and the intellectual capital to really, ignite another tech revolution.
The United States is an absolute superpower when it does come to technology. There's no doubt about that. Go to Silicon Valley, go to these companies. Let's look at the world's most valuable company right now, Nvidia, right? Over $4 trillion market cap. It's an incredible company. They produce incredible microchips. And what's really interesting here is we look at, I'm going to take you back a few years ago when China was growing, and basically there was a fear, right? There was a fear that China's going to be rising too fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to block their access to the most advanced microchips. Now, what happens is, and this is something that happens very frequently between the United States and China, there's always this containment policy. You'll hear this a lot. We want to contain China's rise. And the thing is that whatever sector it's in, for example, the first one was microchips. You're not allowed to buy these microchips. Yeah. Okay.
Which hurt Intel, ironically. Yeah.
Which devastated Intel. Yeah. It devastated Intel because Intel was not very smart. They didn't get on the AI revolution. They didn't invest in AI. So while everyone's going all in on AI, Intel said that's not going to be us. We're going to kind of stick to what we do good. But Intel, worst performing stock in the S&P 500 last year.
And now potentially the U.S. government is considering doing something very socialist, which is taking a stake in Intel. Right. Which is quite weird for me as a guy who comes from a socialist country. Like, I would have never imagined the U.S. government owning a stake of a private company, but beats me.
But I think what's happened is where my point with this is that when the United States sanctions China, it backfires because it simply makes China more resilient, because they're going to have to double down. They're going to pour more capital into that area. And we've seen this. So for example, within the last 3 years, we've seen a big shift. 3 years ago, Joe Biden said, China is not allowed to buy Nvidia microchips, the most advanced microchips, right? The A100s. So what Nvidia did is they said, okay, you know what? We're going to go one step down. We're going to make a version called the H20. It's not going to be as good. It'll be a little bit watered down version, but we'll sell the H20 chips to China. China said, great, we'll buy those chips. They're basically, second tier chips, but
they're still very good.
They're still very good. And actually what we can do is we can take multiple of those second tier chips, put them together, and we can get the same output as the top tier one.
Okay.
So we'll just buy more, essentially. Now, what happened is this ended up being very lucrative for Nvidia. Nvidia's, the China market for Nvidia represents a $15 billion market. So that was $15 billion in revenue, to Nvidia, selling to China. And unfortunately, Donald Trump said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to now block this, and we don't want you to buy any. So no H20 chips are going to China. Now, again, while this is all going on, Huawei is working extremely hard building the most advanced chips. TSMC, another company based in Shanghai, they're building their chips. And now what happened is that Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, he's pleading with Trump, he's pleading with the U.S. government, look, this is a big part of our bottom line. Like, we want to sell chips to China.
You're hurting an American company.
You're hurting an American company at the end of the day. So Trump says, you know what? Let's reverse it. You guys are now allowed to sell H20 chips to China. This was about 2 months ago. China, just this week, 2 days ago, they said, we are now banning Chinese companies from buying the H20 chips.
So right back at you, kind of thing.
Right back at you. But the main reason for that is because within these last 3 years of the banning and selling and this and that, China domestically has been able to produce a domestic chip that matches the same capabilities of that H20 chip.
So ironically, the sanctions not only backfire, but ultimately undermine the power of American companies abroad. Because if they had just kept that lifeline open, the American company would have continued dominating the Chinese market, selling into it, et cetera. But now you have a Chinese company that creates a rival product. And then you're like, oh my God, the Chinese are catching up.
And I think that's where, there was a period of time there where it was very lucrative for American companies, because Chinese said, well, we don't really need to develop microchip technology. We'll just buy them all.
Exactly. It's easier, simpler.
Yeah, way simpler, right? We'll just buy them all, no problem. But then, of course, if you're not going to sell it to us, well, then what are we going to do? We have to have these chips, so we will develop them internally.
Interesting.
So we've seen this with a lot of things. I mean, same thing with Huawei. Huawei got massively hit with sanctions. Their revenue on quarter went down 76%. The CEO said, look, we got to embrace for difficult times. We're going to have to kind of, regroup here. We're going to shift patterns. So, for example, we're not going to be going so much into the smartphones. We're going to take a step back. We're going to look at other areas, basically diversify. For example, we're going to go really heavy into cloud services, because that's a service that we can sell domestically in China, that we can raise some revenue. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, Huawei announces a brand new phone using domestically produced chips. And everyone's like, whoa, where did this come from? And it's like,
he just circumvented the entire U.S. blockade, basically.
Yes, and basically, well, that's what we were working on the last 2 years, right? So again, I think this is a big issue that I want people to understand. I mean, we saw this with Steve Wozniak. I mean, he was amazing last night, where he said, a lot of Americans underestimate China. A lot of Americans think that China is a copycat nation, but they have the ingenuity. That was his message last night. And that's a big thing. And the message that I always preach is, we can't be sleeping on China.
Right. One thing, because we sort of stumbled upon the topic of trade, because we talked a little about Intel, the chips, etc. Obviously, you're a geopolitical expert. We cannot ignore the big elephant in the room of the trade wars that have been started by Donald Trump, which obviously does not affect only China, but several, Asian nations. India's in the middle of this. Europe, obviously, there was recently a quasi-deal, like basically America versus the world, in this regard. So how do you view the impact of Donald Trump's trade war? Has this benefited China? Has this shifted the power dynamics in any way? Is there any use to this strategy? What are your views?
It's a great question, and it's a big question, because that's been the theme of 2025, right? It's the trade war with Donald Trump, and I mean, let's go back to April 2nd. Donald Trump launches Liberation Day, where he literally tariffs every single country in the entire world, right? Every country, I mean, baseline would be 10%, some countries as high as 80%. Every country's got to pay this tariff. Now, let's go to the first logical thinking about this. When you think about it from Donald Trump's perspective, his idea is not wrong, right? It's like, let's tariff these countries. That way, American companies have an incentive to reshore those companies back to the United States, right? We're going to reshore these companies. We're going to build manufacturing in America. We're going to increase jobs. You're going to have a better paycheck. America's going to prosper.
The 1950s are back.
Everything. So on paper, it sounds great. And that's why he was able to sell that to the American public, because everyone's like, yeah, I want to make America great again. Yeah, bring back manufacturing, bring back more jobs, bring back better income. I'm all for it. But the problem with this is immediately you start getting into the logistics of, wow, relocating factories from abroad back to America. Well, it's not like you can snap your fingers and magically
it's
get factories.
expensive.
It's extremely expensive. It's extremely timely. And I mean, in order to get the permits, the licenses, to just build all of this stuff, it takes a lot of time. It's certainly not an instant fix. The other problem is that we have moved on as a society. There is a interesting poll from Fortune Financial Times. They ran a poll in America. They asked two questions. The first question was, my life would be better if there was more manufacturing in America. 80% of the respondents said, yes, I agree with that. Okay, 80% said my life would be better if more manufacturing was made in America. Next question, my life would be better if I was working in manufacturing.
No.
20% said yes.
Of course.
So that's the dynamic, right? We love the concept of, I want to buy made in America. Great. Well, here's the price tag for buying made in America. It's going to cost you significantly more. You still want to buy made in America?
Like, hell no.
And when it comes down to taking out your wallet and paying for it, that's when people start becoming, I wouldn't say unpatriotic, but we just think logically, like, why would I pay 3 times more for something I can buy?
For an equivalent product.
For an equivalent product. Exactly. And that's where we're at. So I think with the trade war, I think Donald Trump is definitely using it as a negotiation tactic. I think that's his main deal, is wanting to get countries to come to the table. I think he's made some big mistakes. We look at, for example, Korea. Since 2007, we've had a free trade agreement with Korea, for both countries back and forth. All of a sudden it's like, well, guess what? You have a 20% tariff. So the Koreans are like, well, hey, like we're not in that China boat, right?
We've been nice to you.
We've been
allies for
years. We've been allies for a long time. I mean, we've done robust trade for many years. Like, why are we getting subject with this hit? So I think this is a very interesting dynamic. Now, has it hurt China? It definitely has hurt China. There's been certainly a lot of factories you're looking around 13-14% of the goods produced in China gets exported to the United States. That's not an insignificant amount, but it's also not a damaging one that's going to completely crash the economy. Right?
So that's interesting that you mentioned that, because a lot of people and a lot of our viewers are probably thinking, okay, Cyrus, you beat me on the last one, right? China, all of this are catching up, but ultimately China is not a consumer economy. The U.S. is a consumer economy. China is an export economy.
Correct.
So without the U.S. consumer market, China would be dead. But now you're saying, yeah, okay, the U.S. is a significant customer to China, but it's not the only one. So can China survive without the United States?
China can definitely survive without the United States. It's going to take, again, I don't want to say everything's going to be peachy and everything's great. It would definitely take a significant hit. And certain companies that are very exposed to, like, hey, all of my customers are in America, you're going to get hit. But you have to remember, what's the number one trading partner for China? Number one trading partner is ASEAN. So the ASEAN network, which is
ASEAN network is more important than the U.S.
Yeah. Number 2 is the European Union. Number 3 is the United States.
Oh.
So actually, when you look at where China trades more with, they trade more with ASEAN, which is, this growing group of Malaysia, Singapore, these 10 countries in Southeast Asia. That's the number one trading partner, which they have increased trade with tremendously, since COVID. So every year it's grown exponentially. European Union has more trade with China than the United States. And then the United States comes in at number 3. So again, it is certainly a significant, it's an important relationship for China and for Chinese, consumers, for Chinese exporters. But again, there's other options. When you are the number one trading partner for 120 countries around the world, you have options, right? It's an export economy. But the other thing is,
that's a very nomad capitalist concept. You have options. There's diversification. They use the international diversification.
Exactly. And so I think that's where, a lot of Chinese really have the viewpoint right now. If this is the road that you want to take, that's fine. We're not going to sweat. We will figure it out. And so and I think the thing is there are certain countries around the world that you could bully. An example of that would be Canada. The United States can bully Canada because Canada doesn't have the leverage, the financial stature. They just don't have the industry to really stand up to the United States.
And by the way, we love Canadians. This is just an objective observation. Yes.
I'm a dual citizen of Canada. I'm Canadian as well.
Oh, there you go. I did not know that.
Yeah. My wife is Canadian, and so we live there. Our children are all Canadian as well. So, we love Canada, but unfortunately, Canada doesn't have the cards to play ball with China.
It's an economic reality.
It is. So they don't have the cards to play with the United States. But, when you look at India, You look at China. These are countries that Donald Trump has tried to bully, and both of them have stood up. A lot of people were very surprised with India, that India said, you know what, we're going to go shift closer to China. This is a big geopolitical story that's happened in the last couple of weeks.
They even dodged some calls from Donald Trump. They didn't call him back.
Yeah, so Donald Trump called Prime Minister Modi 4 times. He rejected the call 4 times, and instead he jumped on a plane, went to Beijing for the first time for an official state visit for the first time in 7 years. He joined Vladimir Putin with other, Kim Jong-un. I mean, he's
that's very BRICS.
Very BRICS.
BRICS plus North Korea. In this case.
Yeah. But it was for that military parade, but it was also for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. And so again, it was very symbolic because this was Prime Minister Modi. I believe that he was playing ball as well, because he had sent out a tweet, for example. He's in a limousine with Vladimir Putin, and he's like, it's so great to see my good friend Vladimir Putin, has his arm around him. And I'm speculating a little bit here, but I almost think that was a little bit of a shot at the United States, because I think with the wording saying like, here's my good friend Vladimir, it's almost kind of taking a shot at the United States, saying, look, we have options as well. But the big thing was, and I was actually with a number of Indian television hosts on some TV programs in the last couple of weeks, and the Indian side is this was an attack on our sovereignty. This is a very, it was
offensive.
It was offensive, and it's an attack on our sovereignty. And again, this is why understanding the multipolar world is so important. India has options. And so they said, well, we can go move closer to China. Yeah. We can move closer.
So then 2 subsequent questions there.
Sure.
It's interesting when you analyze the trading patterns and you see what China's options are. Now let's flip the script and let's see, can the US survive without China? How dependent is the US on China? So if we look at it in reverse. And then the other thing there would be, is the United States understanding at a governmental level that the world is now multipolar? I leave those 2 with you.
Great. I'm going to answer the first one with a little bit of a joke. So there was a social media personality, a Chinese man. He made a great Instagram reel, very simple. He said, this is the things that I have in my house that are made in America. What do you have in your house that's made in China? Right? And so when you ask that question, can the United States survive without China? Well, I would definitely ask my Americans, go to Walmart and start looking at all of the products in your Walmart and how many of those are made in China. So, we actually see, I always say this, the United States economy is interconnected with China. China plays a very big part of the quality of life that we want to live in the United States, whether it's, going to a Walmart and affording very reliable, cheap products that are of good quality.
For everyday life,
Yeah, for everyday life. So, there's so many elements that are there. Even, if you have an iPhone, well, guess what? That's being made in China.
Designed in California.
Yes, designed in California, but manufactured in China. Steve Wozniak, he was not for the trade war. He said, look, if I can get a good quality product made at a good price point in another country, why not do that? I am more about the consumer. I'm for more power to the consumer and having that choice.
Very free trade.
Very free trade. So I think that would be my answer to that first question, is I don't think that the United States can survive without China. We saw this when we had that tariffs earlier in the year, April, stock market crashed. Everybody was worried about what is going to happen with China. What happened? Donald Trump reversed that plan against China, and he said, okay, 90-day extension. Guess what? Another 90-day extension. Now another 90 days. So every 90 days is just an extension. It's just an extension. A little bit of him trying to save face, I believe. Because he certainly wants a trade war with China. But like I said, the U.S. and Chinese economies, it goes both ways. They're both interconnected there. Remind me of the second question.
The second one is, does the U.S. government at a federal level, Donald Trump, U.S. Congress, do these people understand, in your view, that the world is now multipolar, or do they still think the U.S. dominates the world, that the economy revolves around the U.S.?
They definitely don't understand that we live in a multipolar world, because I think there's a certain element, or maybe requirement, you could say, to be a United States politician, and that is this American exceptionalism, right?
The shiny city on a hill.
Yes, for many American politicians, and I think for many Americans in general, we have this thing called American exceptionalism, where we believe we're the best country in the world. We believe that we're number one, and everybody should come do business with us because we're the United States and we're the best. But I'm a U.S. citizen. I've spent a lot of my life living in the United States. I love America. I love the United States. It's a great country. Is it the number one country in the world? I wouldn't say it is, but maybe it is for some people.
Yeah, or for certain things, like
or for certain
industries,
things,
or,
you know, maybe certain industries or for certain people. I certainly like to travel around the world. I've been to over 65 countries. I continue to travel around the world. I like to, I like to find the good in all countries. I love Malaysia. I love being here in Kuala Lumpur. It's one of my favorite cities. And so I think kind of the big thing that I want people to understand in this interview is that we do live in a multipolar world. Go outside, explore it, travel it. Don't believe media. Don't even believe everything we're saying in this video as your sole source, right?
Got it.
Maybe take this information and say, guess what? You know, that inspired me, but now I'm going to go see China for myself and make my observations, and do that with every country that you want to see.
That sounds fantastic. And on that note of multipolarity, of supporting international living and traveling around the world, I thank you, Cyrus Janssen. Very interesting. Hope to host you again soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Javier. Pleasure.